Hello, in this video I'm going to give an updated review of this Rokinon 35-150 f2 to f2.8 zoom lens. My first video review still holds. This is a great lens, very high image quality, useful focal range, plus that parfocal autofocus is a killer feature. You can adjust your composition, zoom in, zoom out without losing focus. That's a huge convenience. That said, there are some practical considerations about this lens due to its weight and size. Its weakness at the wide end, 35, is a lot of times not wide enough. And also, a very practical consideration is image quality for portraiture. Even though people claim this is a fantastic portrait lens for wedding photographer, its image quality, though good, it's nowhere close to that offered by a good prime lens. So for most consumers, unless you're the kind of run and gun style, you're shooting portraiture, shooting a wedding, you need to take a picture of the crowd, then you need to take some zoomed in shot from far away of the bride and groom. For this kind of run and gun style, you need the flexibility of the zoom, but for most consumers, if you're shooting portraiture for your family, for your friends, you are much better off with the prime lens due to its superior image quality. Okay, let's get into the first point, weight and size. Last month, during the Memorial Day weekend, my family traveled to Vermont for a short vacation. We hiked Mount Mansfield. The hiking trip was not too long, slightly over 6 miles. The elevation is over 2,000 feet, not bad at all. But this lens, which is close to 3 pounds, together with my Nikon ZF, I use an adapter, so 1.5 pounds. That's close to 5 pounds of weight. And that thing, together with the camera bag, it dangles on my neck. You can see my daughter is carrying the camera bag, empty bag, yeah. That thing dangles off my neck. Felt like a piece of brick. It's pretty heavy, close to 5 pounds. So if you're on a hiking trip, you're on foot, your first consideration should be water. And that heavy camera gear does detract from your experience. It makes the hiking trip a lot harder. It's hot. Now you have every ounce of weight on your neck. It does not feel good. And also because it's so heavy, it dangles when you climb on all fours, like you climb some rock face with your hands. That thing dangles behind you. It's not a very good experience. So this lens, because of its weight and size, it's not ideal for travel on foot. If you're climbing in the street or some easy trails, flat, it's totally fine. But climbing, no. So you're much better off with the small zoom lens like the Tamron 22-40 f2.8 or even the prime lens, 35mm prime lens for travel. It's not good for climbing. Also, because of its ridiculous size, if you carry this lens in the street for street photography, you'll be able to take a lot of pictures, but you stand out. People will notice you. If you want to sneak a few shots of some people, you can't. Once you point the thing at somebody, they will notice right away because it's huge. If you carry this lens inside a restaurant, you look ridiculous. So the size and weight is not good for street photography either. That said, it's still a very versatile lens. I can show you some of the pictures I took with this lens. This picture of beaver without 150mm long end, I wouldn't have gotten the shot. Of course, I could have brought multiple lenses, but by the time I swap on my telephoto lens, the beaver probably is already gone. So that 150 focal range at the long end is really useful. They come in handy occasionally. This is another picture of a lake with birds flying. Without the 150 focal range, I wouldn't have gotten this picture either. So that long end is really nice, coming in handy occasionally, but that does not compensate for the loss at the wide end because 35mm is not wide enough for a lot of situations. So for an average person, if you are shooting photos in the street or the landscape, you are most likely better off with a standard zoom lens of, say, 24-70 instead of 35-150. The extra reach at the long end most likely will not be able to compensate for the loss at the wide end from 24-35 or 28-35. That is actually pretty important focal length. This is a picture I took yesterday at the Harvard University. You can see this building is pretty tall, and because the street is narrow, my back was literally against the wall of another building. And I would rather include more of the sky, but there was simply no room to back into. So 35 is not wide enough under a lot of situations in the street. If you want to take a picture of some tall buildings, it's just not wide enough. Another example, this church, also near Harvard campus, is located at a busy intersection. In order to include the full building, including the tip of the church, I had to wait for the traffic light to turn green. Then I backed into the pedestrian crossing and snapped this shot. Because if I'm on the sidewalk, the lens at 35mm is not wide enough. Part of the building will be missing. So I couldn't get the correct composition unless I backed into the middle of the street. Obviously, when the traffic light is green, there's the pedestrian crossing. Now, this is another limitation of this lens. It's very weak at the wide end. Most likely, if you travel, you will need something else, like 16 to 35mm wide angle lens to complement this lens. And you are most likely much better off with a standard zoom, like 25 to 70 versus this 35 to 150. That's why on YouTube a lot of people left a comment, this is great for wedding. Why? Because wedding, you probably most likely will not need wider than 35. The venue and stuff shouldn't be that wide. The number of guests, and also you will need the reach because you want a snapshot of the bride and groom from far away without having to step forward. And also F2 max aperture, also at a telephoto and F2.8, comes in handy very nicely. So for wedding and stuff, I can understand why people love this focal range. But for most average consumers walking around in the street, taking a picture of a landscape, you are much better off with a lens that has a stronger wide end at 24 or 28. Speaking of wedding, now let's talk about image quality for portraiture. I think at the wedding, because you have to capture the moment, you have no time to pose the subjects for shots, right? Things happen, you have to zoom in, zoom out, snap the shot, run a gun. It's understandable why people prefer a zoom lens. But if you're just average consumer, you want to take pictures, portraiture of your family, of your friends or colleagues, you are much better off with a prime lens because of the image quality. In my previous video, I already showed that this lens is very sharp. It has some chromatic aberration, but it's nothing to worry about. And for a zoom lens, especially a super zoom with more than 4 times of magnification from 35 to 150, the image quality is plenty good. As you can see, this image is very sharp, very nice. Now, if you compare an image like this against another image taken with a prime lens, you will see the difference right away. You will very much prefer the image quality of the prime lens over the zoom lens. For example, I took 2 cameras with 2 different setups. One camera with this zoom lens, another camera body with the 50mm prime or 85 or 135 prime. I took 2 setups on various trips. I snapped shots with both setups. I very much like the prime lens. There's just no comparison. The prime lenses are sharper, much better micro contrast. The image pops a lot more because the prime lens has fewer elements. There's far less loss of information, so it can capture many more grades of the same color, the tones. So the image looks much 3D than this zoom lens. The micro contrast is a big difference. For this image, you can see it's good enough, but if you put this image against another image taken with the same setting of a prime lens, you will notice the difference right away. It's noticeable even on your cell phone screen. I took a picture of my cat with a zoom and then a similar picture with my 135 f1.8 prime lens. I uploaded the picture to my cell phone. I compared the 2 images on my cell phone screen. It's tiny, but you can notice the difference right away. The prime lens image looked much more 3D because of the superior micro contrast. So is this lens a replacement for a portrait lens like 85 1.8 or 135 or 50 1.8? No, not even close. I'd rather prefer a modern prime lens like 50 1.8 S lens from Nikon or 85 or 135 for that matters. Yeah, so it's no substitute for a superior prime lens. You need to set your expectation right. So the image you're looking at now, it's sharp enough, good enough for a lot of situations, but it's not as good as a prime lens. Absolutely. So as a hobbyist, you probably will still prefer your prime lens under a lot of situations. Okay, so this is my second review about this lens, the weight, size, the weakness at the wide end, and also the image quality, which is good but nowhere close to that of a comparable prime lens. Thank you for your time watching this video.